Yeah, I was talking with Evan earlier, and we were chatting about the presentation. And I would encourage anybody in here who's thinking about speaking at the user group that you should definitely just do it. Like, we will be friendly and kind, and the people in the room, you all are very a welcoming audience, and so it's a pretty easy thing to do, in my opinion. You might be a little bit apprehensive about it, but after you do it once or twice, it's not a big deal. I will say that this is the first time I've done this presentation. I don't have any slides. This is the only slide I have. I have not run through it at all. I have like a general kind of outline thing that I want to get through, but so this could go a lot of different directions, and I would encourage you, if you have questions during the presentation, to shout them out and stop me and let me know what you're thinking, and we can take it in a different direction too. But yeah, so I guess who in the room knows the difference between authentication and authorization? Who thinks they fully understand that? Okay. All right, well that's cool. Great, you're in the right place tonight. Yeah, so authentication is what happens when you log in to a website. You log into anything, and it identifies who you are, and that's pretty sophisticated in and of itself. And if you attended my session at the Azure user group meeting last year, I think it was in August, I talked all about authentication in Entra ID at that point, and how it works, and how OAuth works, and how it all ties together, and that whole thing. There's a ton more that I could get into just on that topic. That is a huge, broad topic. I'm not going to touch on that tonight. We might talk about a little bit of it, but what I am going to focus on tonight is authorization. And the difference between authentication and authorization is that authentication is when you log in. Authorization is when you need to get access to some kind of resource, and that resource needs to be protected based on who you are. And so when you need to distinguish between a power user or an admin user and a reader of your system, that's authorization. That's when you're saying, you can have access, but you can't. I know who both of you are. You've both authenticated, but only you get access to it, right? So does that make sense? It's pretty simple delineation, but it's super important for the context of this conversation. Both are extremely complicated in how you do it, and they're not really that complicated, I'd say. They're more complicated in the sense that everybody has their own spin on it, everybody kind of does a little different, and it's security. And so security just, I don't know, I'm a developer. I think this is a safe place to say this, but I don't like security. Like, it's important, I get it, I understand it, but it makes my job difficult, because all I want to do is focus on getting the stuff done that I want to get done. And so I've got some tools here for you tonight that I'm going to show you that should hopefully make that better, and hope you'll get something out of it. So I'm going to try one of two things is going to happen here. I'm going to try and set this up from scratch, and it will work, and that will be amazing, or more likely it won't work, and I'll shift back to the pre-prepared presentation that I put together. So this is all about ASP.NET Web API and Entra ID, which was previously called Azure Active Directory. So yeah, so we're going to log in to I'm just going to close, yeah, we're going to log in, and so I have a tenant in Azure, and a tenant is just a collection of users and service principals and groups and all the things that you need to do security, all the user things that you need to handle. And so we don't want that one, because that is the production Kiewit tenant. So we want this omaha.dev. So this is a nonprofit organization that Brian and I formed last year, and this is the umbrella that we use for the user group. And so we have just this is really a very kind of vanilla Entra ID instance. So so this is, if you're not familiar, this is the Azure portal. And you can do all the Azure things in here. The thing that we're going to focus on tonight is this Entra ID. Hopefully that is big enough for you. Let's see if I can. There we go. Okay. So this is the name of our tenant, omaha.dev. Some basic information. This tenant ID is, and I guess I'll say this. There's some secret things that you're probably going to see tonight, and there's some public things. And after this is all over, I'm deleting all the secret stuff, so don't get too excited. This tenant ID is considered public information. You shouldn't really share it around. It's not something you want to go like post on your LinkedIn profile or something like that, but it shouldn't be considered private. It's not a secret. But this is important for when you access Entra ID. And then there's two different components in here that we're going to spend a lot of time. Well, I guess there's more than that. We have app registrations, enterprise applications, users, and groups. Those are the main components we're going to focus on tonight. And so inside of my users, I set up a few different users that are in here. You can see that we've got Brian Olson and this guy, and then some demo accounts that I created just for the presentation. By the way, it's really hard to create demo accounts in Entra because they want you to be a real person, and these aren't real people. And then myself, and then this is a guest account that I use. Oh no, this is the guest account. This is my omaha.dev account. You can tell the difference between a guest account and a tenant account is that, my user principal name here is matt@omaha.dev, and then this one this is matt@ruwe.net, and then it adds on the omaha.dev there, so you can tell that's a guest account, and it comes from an external Azure AD. Yeah, and that's really all you need to know here. The other thing I guess that I have is inside of each one of these demo users, I have one setting in here that we're going to use to demonstrate some capabilities, and I just filled in the city for each one of these users. So the Denver user has the Denver city, the Omaha user is Omaha city. I got Omaha, Lincoln, Denver, Chicago. I tried to find cities with just one name. Instead of like Los Angeles or Kansas City or St. Louis, those all have two, right? So I had to type less. Anyway, makes sense? Pretty simple so far, right? Okay. Let's go back to the home or the Entra ID setup. We've got a few groups in here too. I've got this January 2024 RBAC read group. We'll get into that. And we've got this Lincoln users, Omaha users. I've got Denver users, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. And then, so that's the groups. Then we have the app registrations. And this is where this is where you start digging into the authentication side of it. So when you want to authenticate to an Entra ID resource, you have to have an app registration, and then this app registration has a number of things in it. So I'm going to create a new one, and this is the part where it gets scary, right? Because it probably won't work, because you got to type in a lot of stuff. Okay, so I'm going to say 2024. We're just giving it a name. 2024 January user group meeting, right? Then we got a setting here, and I'm not going to get into a whole bunch of stuff. Basically, this one says that this app registration is only used in this tenant. That's fine. I'm going to have to fill in this redirect URI later, but we'll get to that. And now we have an app registration. And along with that app registration, we get this, they call it a managed application in local directory, or otherwise known as a enterprise application. And inside this enterprise application, which is attached to the app registration, you can assign users to your application at this point. And so this would allow people to log in, and this is where authorization sort of starts to pick up, and you start to understand it, or you start to use it. And so inside of here, there is an important setting that, at least a key, what we require all of our enterprise applications to have turned on, is this assignment required. And what this does is when you try to log into this enterprise application, with this setting turned on, it will force you to be a user that's assigned to this application. If you don't have that set up, anybody in your tenant can use it. Any guest accounts in your user or in your tenant can use it. So they can log into your applications and be a valid user. Doesn't mean they're authorized, just means they're a valid user, and you know who they are because they've proven it. So we're going to go ahead and turn this on for this application. Yeah, that whole guest account thing is a little bit scary because it doesn't take much to become a guest account in a tenant. I don't know the details around it. This is where I'm going to be pretty weak, but I've heard that just by joining a Teams meeting, if you're in one tenant and you're joining a Teams meeting in another tenant, you basically get a guest account in that other tenant. And then you can generate tokens for that tenant, and if they haven't secured their applications with authorization, you can log into their applications, right? Bad deal.
The ABAC is like bolt strap or bolted onto the top of what's it called? Microsoft for their identity, the old name for identity service. What was it called? You mentioned it earlier. What was it called?
I don't know. Oh yeah. Well, that was the previous name for it. Yep.
Right. So it looks like this is like right now the settings are familiar to like OIDC, like if you're to be OpenID or OAuth too.
Yeah, OIDC is going to be more focused on demonstrating who you are, and that's you generate an OIDC token by providing a scope that's I believe. You pass in a profiles claim, I think. Not 100% sure on the details for that one, but yeah, OIDC is focused on who the user is, authentication, whereas OAuth in general is focused on authorization. And I'll show you some claims here in a minute that will get into it. So, okay. Any questions? Any other questions before we keep moving on?
When you turn that on, you have to do admin consent?
For this setting, no. This does not require...
That's what I'm running into.
Well, no, you're right. There is a way to consent for your entire tenant, which I had to do for this. It is under... I want to say that it was under...
It's one of those on the left.
Yeah, it might not be turned on yet because I haven't saved it. I'm not 100% sure. Well, let's go. Nope. Yeah, if I see it, I will point it out. But yeah, I think you're right. You do have to do some kind of consenting for your application inside of your tenant.
Yeah, it's not in the scopes, but we're used to seeing it in app registration.
Right.
It's a different one in the enterprise app.
Yes, it is, and we'll switch over to the other one. I've decided in my head I'm not going to use this one because it's too scary for me. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to talk about here was the roles. And so we're going to go back to the application registration. Inside your app registration, you have a number of different things that you can set up. So authentication is where you can turn on how your tokens are generated. Are you going to give back ID tokens or access tokens or both? Are you going to support which OAuth flows you're going to support? Is it web-based, so like an authorization code flow, or yeah, I guess web would be authorization code flow. Single page applications use a Pixie flow. iOS and Mac use a different, I think those use Pixie flow. Android, I don't know why we need to distinguish here. But anyway, these are really the only two that I ever use, web and single page app. And even then, like I'm almost 99% of the time using a single page application. In here you specify what the URL of your redirect is, because when you generate a token, Azure will redirect your browser to a specific URL, and in order to prevent somebody from abusing your app registration, it forces it to redirect to a known URL, and it needs you to tell it about that before it will do it. And so that's a security check that it does. And then we typically want to turn on our access tokens as well. Again, I'm going to skip through a bunch of this. I don't remember what the redirect URI is for my app, so I'm going to skip that. But in here we also have expose an API. This is where Mike was just talking about the scopes. We define scopes, and this is kind of the permissions for applications that might connect to our app. And we also have roles, and this is the thing that we're going to focus on tonight. And so I'm going to create a new role in here, and I'm just going to call it something like application.read. Like anybody that's assigned to this role has read access to my application. Then you can say, do you want to assign this only to users and groups, to people? Do you want to assign it to applications or like daemon services that are going to connect to your service that don't have a person associated with them, or do you want to do both? And so we'll just pick both, and then the display name and the value and the description all kind of affect how the thing gets displayed in the browser when it's presented to the user, because they might have a consent when they get presented with this. And so it creates the role, and then we have that available here. And so the way we take advantage of that role is by jumping back over to the enterprise application, where we assign the users and groups and all that. Remember, app registrations are more focused on authentication. Enterprise applications are more focused on authorization. Not 100%, but I think that's safe. Alec, you can feel free to correct me when I'm wrong, because I'm sure I'm saying wrong things here. Alec knows this stuff too. All right, and so we created that role in the app registration, and now remember we turn this on so that we're forcing assignment in here. And so what we can do, like nobody can log into this application now because I've turned that on. The way that we allow users now to get into it is by adding a users and groups. And let's say that I want to just give access to myself. So I'm going to select my user, and you could have selected a group there too. And then it's not showing me my role. What did I do wrong? Well, anyway.
You may need to refresh, sometimes the plate's down.
That's what I was thinking. I'm going to, we'll jump back over here. Users and groups, add.
Yeah, they got the role.
There we go. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so it defaulted it because it knows that's the only role that I have in my application. So then I pick my user, select, and so I got one user selected. The selected role, the only one available, is application.read, and then I can assign. And so when now my user can log into this application and they'll be good to go, right? But that's only me. And the way the application knows what thing you're authorized to connect to at this point is that it will add a token or a claim on your token that for your role. And so in the JWT, when I log in, you'll see that I have this role associated with me. All right. Okay, I'm going to switch over to the real one because, like I said, this is. Okay, so we'll go here, and so this one is pre-configured. I've got a couple different users and groups, and I have two different roles on my app registration. So application.read, application.write, and you'll see those in our application code here in a minute. And then let's jump back over to the authentication inside the app registration. We're back on the authentication side of it. These things are like intermingled, and you gotta bounce back and forth a little bit. But you can see my redirect URI is set to localhost port 5043, which is the port that my API is going to be running on. And yeah, so let's go over and take a look at the source code real quick. Actually, let's keep on keeping on. I'm going to do this from scratch. So I'm going to create a new project, and we're going to create a ASP.NET Core Web API, and I'm just going to call it user group meeting. And then it's going to be .NET 8, configure HTTPS, enable Docker. We don't want to do that right now. Enable Open API. Do not use top level statements and use controllers. So kind of the full-blown solution. All right, so now we got a brand new web API. By default, this will not be set up with authentication turned on. So if we open up the program CS file, as my computer grinds, we'll see that it's real simple, right? There's not a whole lot going on in here. All right, and so what we need to do in order to turn on authentication inside this application, and so this is also assuming that we've got like a React or an Angular application running on the front end that's connecting to our API and has already authenticated the user. They're giving us a token, and that's all done, right? That's what we talked about last year, which would take a whole meeting to go through. This is assuming all of that has happened. If you want to know how that works, we can talk about that later. But this is all focused around validating. And so in order to do that, we need to add a NuGet package to our application. And Microsoft has a package that they provide that works directly with Entra ID that basically will validate the token for you. And validating tokens, again, super complicated. It's ridiculous. But this thing does everything for you. And it ends up being relatively simple while still being kind of complicated. So it's Microsoft.identity.web is the thing you're going to want to search for. And it's right there at the top. I'm just going to install the latest version of that. Brings in a whole boatload of dependencies. And we're done. And so let's go back to our program CS and let's make this bigger so you can see it. All right, so real simple right now, right? And so in order to add authentication, we need to add some code. And it ends up looking like this.
What's that toolbox thing you're using? Is that standard in Studio?
Yeah, you can take code snippets and drag them over there and then pull them back out later. So that's the best way that I've found to not like type while I'm presenting, because that doesn't work well. Yeah, I like that way. If other people have other ways, I'd be interested to hear about it, because it'd be nice to be able to copy and paste from another screen. But yeah. Anyway, we have the builder.services, and this is your IOC container. So at this point, your application is still starting up. You're basically setting up all of your services inside of your container so that it will be able to resolve those services at runtime. So your application is technically not running when this code runs. It's not serving web pages yet, and it's just getting ready to. And we're adding authentication. And in this case, we're saying that I'm going to add the JWT bearer defaults. Now, this is just a constant. If we F12 into that, you'll see that it just says bearer. Right, so it's just a constant string that says bearer, and so we're just passing a string into there. And what that does is forces it to verify that you have a bearer token that you're passing in. And this will not quite, this isn't everything you need. And so you need some more code to make this work. And so we need the MS Identity Web libraries pulled in, and this is where everything that we just did in our app registration comes to light. So let's talk about what's going on here. So we call this add Microsoft Identity Web. We pass it in this JWT options. And then we start telling it, how do we authenticate our token? How do I know that this user is coming from a place that I trust, and that thing that I trust has also validated that the user is real? So if we need to say that the audience is valid, the audience is the thing, it's a claim inside of our token that says, this is the service that I'm trying to connect to. And then you want to say, am I that service? Was this token meant for somebody else? If it's meant for somebody else, I'm going to reject it. I don't want it because it's not for me. Even if it's for the user that's authenticated with the person that, or the identity provider that authenticated the user that I trust, they created this token, but they created it for something else, then that's bad. I don't want it. And so it will go through and validate that the token is given to was generated for a thing that is being connected to. And then we also want to say that the issuer is a valid issuer. So the issuer is the tenant ID that we looked at earlier. The tenant ID tells us that this is the thing that we trust. We trust Entra ID. We trust that my tenant is only controlled by me. Only I can log into it. Only I can set up users. Only I can authorize users to do the things that they want to do. So that's who I trust. And the token is signed by that provider and delivered to me, and I can this library will validate that signature. It will validate the audience. It will validate the issuer, and then it also does some more stuff. Okay, so those are two very important components of it. We also need to validate. We need to tell it that it's connecting to Microsoft to do for our token endpoints. And I'll show you that. Actually, let's just switch back over here. Oops. Oh man, where'd it go? Okay, so in our app registration, so it's 2024 January API, we have the we have the client ID, this ED36281D, right? This is the first few letters in there, and you can see that my client ID that I'm validating against matches that. ED36281D. And then tenant ID A470 is the same as my directory or tenant ID here, A4707. So same thing, right? And so this is all setting my web app up so that it will validate that the token coming in is good. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I have a question. So with the valid audience, is that typically a application, or can it be a larger thing like a resource group or subscription?
In Entra, at least in my experience, it's always a app registration ID. So it's always that client ID. I believe, what's that? Sorry, I didn't hear.
I think with managed identities, like if you have this app running and you assign it whatever magic identity, I think you have bigger scopes than just
Yeah, and scopes can be unique, right? I mean, they can be names, they can be GUIDs, they can be URLs, they can be whatever you want them to be, but you have to conform to whatever that is. Like the managed identity for data, when you connect to databases, I think is like databases.windows.net or something like that. So that's the scope that you pass in. That becomes, and the scope is used to derive your audience from, and then your audience is validated in your token here. So, but we're getting more into the authentication side where the token's generated. We're not touching that tonight, right? That's a whole other thing. Did that answer the question, Samantha? Cool. Yep. All right. Let's see. So are we ready to authenticate to our web application? Not quite yet. Last thing that we need to do in here is set up authentication and authorization for our middleware. Now, for whatever reason, I don't know why they do it this way, but it has it set up by default to use authorization, but not authentication. I'm sure there's a good reason for it, but I don't know what it is. Let's do So I'm going to add my middleware, and what this does is, well, everything below this builder.build is basically when your app is ready to go, and this is telling it, this is the order of operations that I want you to do things in. And so first I want you to redirect if the user went to an HTTP URL. I'm going to actually delete that because I want it to go to HTTP. Don't do this in production. But then the next thing that I want it to do is authenticate my user. And then after that, I want to map my controllers, which is the thing that actually like renders your APIs and does stuff. Okay, so we have just a really entry-level API here. We got the default controller that comes with it, and so I'm just going to run this, and then a browser will pop up, and if I did everything right, it should say 401. While that's, oh, I got it. Okay, it did not. Of course not. Oh, yes, thank you, Jim. Yes. Yes, I forgot something very important. So, as Jim pointed out, I need to set up authorization in my application. Now, one of the most basic authorizations is that the user has authenticated. And so let's add the basic auth Z. That's gonna not do. Okay, so I'm gonna just delete some code here. This should now do what I want it to. And I'll explain it when it works. Okay, so now we get a 401. Perfect, right? And you'll notice there's two different responses. It'll give a 401 or it'll give a 403. 401 means that you're not authenticated to use my application. 403 means you're not authorized to use my application. And so what I changed here is I added an authorization service, and I set the fallback policy to require an authenticated user. And so you can do this a number of different ways. Like Jim said, I could have put an authorize attribute on my endpoints, which would have worked. Or you can. We're going to talk about a number of different ways that you can do this. But this is the basics. And so then, if we wanted to connect to this, why isn't that working? There we go. So let's go figure out what URI my application is connected to. So it generated this randomly, 5292. We'll go ahead and create a new. For those of you that aren't familiar with this tool, this is Insomnia. It's sort of like Postman, except better in my opinion.
Did you say except better?
I think so. It's simpler and not as bloated, and does everything that I need it to do.
Postman licenses now, technically.
I think so. Yeah, they've been a bit fishy about.
Pretty aggressive.
Yeah.
I think they're killing their local client and rushing everybody to licenses.
Yeah, our security guys are real happy about that. Okay, so so I'm going to set up Insomnia to connect to generate a token for me, and again we're kind of delving a little bit here into authorization or authentication, but we're all right. And so inside of your app registration, there's this endpoints button. I didn't know about this button for the longest time, and I struggled every single time I had to do this. This endpoint button is awesome because it will tell you everything that you need to know to set up your OAuth endpoints. And so there's two major endpoints in an OAuth system. You have an authorization endpoint, and you have a token endpoint. The authorization endpoint is the thing that you use to type your password into and log in, and it does its thing. The token endpoint is the thing that issues the token to the application that you're using. And so this gets into all these OAuth flows and the redirects and all that stuff. We're not talking about it. I'm going to keep saying that because it's complicated. Yeah. All right, so the authorization URL is this. You'll see that this part, you probably can't read that on the screen, but that is my tenant ID. And my client ID is right here. So I'm going to pull this guy out. My redirect URL, I can find that one over here. And since I'm using Postman or Insomnia, I don't actually have to have a valid URL because that's not the URL for my app, but it'll work. And then the rest of it, I'm just going to copy from over here. So the scope, in this case, I don't have any scopes on my application because we're not talking about authentication. So I'm just using the default scope. And then my audience, as Sam was alluding to, is just API : / and then my client ID. And so then if I fetch the token, it should pop up with a window. Oh, awesome. It did it without even asking who I am. Okay, so we can see, so it generated this token for me here down in this, in the access token. And so if I come back over to my browser and go to jwt.ms and paste that token into this upper portion, it decodes it for me. And so there's three major components to a token. You have the header, which is this part, and it's the top green thing up here to the period. And then you have the body, which is all of the blue stuff, and then you have the signature, which is at the bottom. And the signature is the thing that validates that the person that issued the token is authorized to do so. And if you're interested in that, stick around afterwards. I'll show you how it works. But we're not talking about it because I'm going to run out of time the way it is. All right, so let's hold on. I'm not done with that. Oh, did I? Yeah, there we go. All right, so let's take a look and see what's inside this token. So again, our audience is in there. You see that, AUD. These are called claims inside the token. So our client ID is there. Our issuer is my sts.windows.net, and then my tenant ID is right there. I don't care about these things. They mean stuff, but they're not important, at least not to me. You can see that it then also starts putting some claims in here that tell the system information about who I am. So family name is Ruwe, given name is Matt, where did the token get generated from, what's the full name, what's the object ID inside of the tenant. So this is the ID that won't change over time even if everything else changes. And again, like I said, these are the roles now that I have inside my app. And so the roles give me or tell me what the user is authorized to do within my app. And so then I can start checking these roles in my app and validate that the person that's logged in is authorized to do the thing that they're trying to do. All right? Any questions about the token and how that works? Awesome. Okay. What's next? I got too much stuff. Okay. Yeah, that's where we were. Okay, and so we have a fully working application that is has authorization turned on and is stopping people from getting in. And I should be able to come over to my Insomnia client and send this request. And it's going to say 404, which is better than 401. And then say weather forecast. And it gives me a weather forecast, right? Because it knows who I am. No applause? Don't applause. Yeah, so we've logged in. We haven't authorized. We've authorized in the sense that we verified that the user is logged in, right? But how do we check to see if that user is authorized to do the things that they want to do? Let's switch over to the full solution real quick, and you're going to have to ignore some stuff in here because there's more in here than you want. So let's take a look. So again, here's our add authorization that we just saw. Inside of there, we're setting the fallback policy to say that that user is, is authenticated, require authenticated user. So that's our fallback policy. If no other policies apply, then that's the policy that I'm going to use. And then I also have several other policies in here. So reader, writer are the two that are most important right now. And so let's go take a look at my more complete, more sophisticated controller than my forecast controller. And I'm going to have to do a little bit of explanation here. And so this is building on itself, so bear with me for a second. We have a system here that has folders, and it can have folders in folders, and it can have files inside of the folders. And there's owners to folders, and those owners can do certain things in the system, right? So let's take a look at that data structure real quick. So folders consist of a name, they consist of subfolders, they consist of files, and this is arbitrary. Like, this has nothing to do with authorization, but this is the way I'm going to demonstrate it, right? It has an owner, and it has groups on there. I'm not going to get into the group side of it because I most certainly will not have time. And then we also have files. And files are real simple, just has name and content. And we're not even worried about content here. And then I've got a demo data method or a class here that just fills in a folder, root folder with a bunch of subfolders, and then those subfolders have files. And you're going to start to see where I'm going here. So we have Omaha as a folder under the root. We have Lincoln as a subfolder under the root. And we have Denver as a subfolder. And we have a bunch of files in each one of those, right? And so when I call my folders controller, it's going to, when I call get, it's just going to return all the folders and files that are under the path that I'm saying. And I have two methods in here. We have an HTTP get, and then we also have an HTTP post. And we're going to comment this out for the moment. This is where it'd be nice if I could, like, just type super fast and not make mistakes, but that's not the way it works. So you get to watch me change the code a little bit. So ignore the FGA stuff right now, but I just realized I forgot something important. Sorry. Let's take a step back just a minute. Three major types of authorization that we should be thinking about. There are probably more, but these are the three that we care about tonight. We have RBAC, which you've probably heard of, role-based access control. We have ABAC, attribute-based access control, and we have ReBAC, which is relationship-based access control. Those are the three that I'm going to try and get into tonight. What I'm demonstrating now is RBAC, and RBAC is good in the sense that it's easy. It's the easiest one that we can implement. It's the easiest to understand, it's the easiest to implement, it's just all around easy. Is it sophisticated? No. It's super coarse-grained. Like, this is the types of things you're going to want to use RBAC for is for admin users of my whole system. If a user has admin access to the whole system, they're a global, God user for the thing, that's something you can use RBAC for. The trouble with RBAC is that when you need to start applying more granular security to different parts, you end up with role explosions because you have lots and lots and lots of roles for every little thing you're doing in your system. Then you have to assign users to each one of those roles, and it gets super complicated, and you have to manage that. ABAC helps improve that because we're not assigning users directly to roles. We still have the roles, but we we utilize attributes of the user. And so the role is populated based on who the user, or what the properties of the user, right? So for instance, and you'll see it here, we have a few different users. We've got Omaha, Lincoln, Denver users. Those users have an attribute on them for their city. And the city is set to either Omaha, Lincoln, or Denver. And there's features inside of Azure, Entra ID, that will allow us to take advantage of that. I can show those to you here in a second. And then there's ReBAC. ReBAC is the end-all, be-all. It can do everything, but it's super complicated. Relationship-based access control basically says, and the folder thing is a great example, you can have access at the top root level, and then that access automatically transitions down because you've set up your authorization scheme to work that way. And I'm going to show you here how that works here in a minute. And then you might only have access to read Omaha files, and so then you can do a get, but you can't do a post. But you might also be the owner of that folder, and so then you can post to it. And but you don't have to assign each user to every level to every file. There's a hierarchy there, and it's well defined, well understood, and we can build an authorization model that takes advantage of that. Make sense? Any questions about that? Sorry, I should have done that at the beginning. Good? Okay. Yeah, so RBAC. We're demonstrating RBAC here, and that's what threw me off. I gotta describe that. So we have two different roles here. We have a reader role. This one technically should be writer. I don't know why that's. We'll make that writer. And so we should be able to do a get. What you saw on the token though that I have my user here has. Oops. It has two different roles, right? Application read, application write. So they already have both of these. So this user will be able to do what I want it to. I'm going to stop this one. All right, we're switching back to the full solution here. All right, so let's go ahead and run this one. And so I'm logged in currently under my user. My user has access to everything. That folder. All right, so here's a folder request. I want access to the folder Lincoln, and this should just give me the files for Lincoln, right? But it's telling me 403 forbidden.
Your token might be expired.
It should have lasted for an hour. Yeah. Well, this gives me a chance to show off some of the debugging capabilities here too. So that's good. So, well, this is something that Alec taught me that I have found extremely valuable. There is a very cool set of settings you can turn on inside of your application. These will start logging very sensitive information into your debug output. Again, don't turn it on in production, but for local, it's awesome. Because by nature, this stuff is security focused, and so they don't expose any information about what's happening. It makes it really hard to debug. When you turn these on, everything starts showing up in the debug log. So we're going to make this bigger. We'll clear it, and then I will drop back over here in Insomnia, and then it's not going to tell me why. It says, yeah, lifetime of the token is valid. Yeah, audience validation is good. Yeah, it's creating claims identity.
Did you change the client ID when you switched between your two different?
It should be right. Oh.
Settings over there.
Oh, you know what? Let's do that. well, let's, and if you do any of this, you're going to have to troubleshoot. So I kind of welcome the opportunity to show my strategies with some of this stuff. So let's take a look and see what we got going on. We can see that the user is me, and the roles are application.write, application.read. Let's make sure that those match what I've got in the program CS in my add authorization. And so I have the reader role and I have the writer role. And what the endpoint that I'm hitting right now is the folder controller, and I'm hitting the
Writer instead of write.
Oh, did I? So reader is the authorization policy name. And oops. So then if I go back here, I need to go to this policy, and then the required role that it's looking for is either application.read, well, it has to have both, I guess, so application.read and application.write, and then application.write and application.read.
Somebody has said it like you, and it just said there was no bodies.
It should, oh, did it, it's giving me a 403.
Oh, I saw it, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, sorry. I don't think I can make that any, yep, yeah, there is no body return, but it's good. I don't want to get too bogged down in trying to troubleshoot, but you kind of saw the process I went through there where I'm validating that the whole thing is good. So like the token has the roles in it that I want. The roles are assigned to the right policy. The policy name is reader. Let's double check. I think there it is. Bingo. Comment that out. So I had a policy on the whole controller that was stopping me from getting there. Okay. Bingo. Okay. So that was fun, right? We got to a little troubleshooting because you're definitely going to have to do that, and especially in the token side of it. So let's do something different. Let's do this. Because this is something that would be useful for you as you're going through it. And I'm getting a little bit off script, so I apologize, but I think this is good stuff. So let's change let's say we fat-fingered the client ID, and the 7 was a 6, right? So that's gonna screw it up. It's gonna not validate now. Actually, it might. I'm not sure. We'll see what happens. So I'm going to go ahead and clear my debug window, go back to Insomnia, send the request, and it still works. Okay. So the reason it still works is because the client ID really doesn't matter. It's not using that to do validation. What it is using is this audience. So let's change the audience.
Doesn't check the client ID?
The client ID must only be used when during token generation, I think. So I might not even need that client ID there. I might have been putting that there this whole time for no reason. This should fail though. If this doesn't fail, then it's like those shirts you see on people with the developer dilemma. It works, or it doesn't work, why? And then it works, why? Either way, you can't win. All right, so now it is definitely not working. We get a 401 unauthorized, which is different than 403, right? So make note of that. 401 means we did not authenticate properly. And so we're going to see why here in a second. Here we go. Yeah, and if you didn't have these settings that I showed you earlier turned on, you wouldn't see this in the log. Can I make this bigger? Nope. That stinks. Okay, so what this says at the bottom is the error, audience validation failed. Audience blah did not match validation audience blah or null. All right. And so it's told us that our audience validation failed, so I got something messed up there, and I can go very laser focused on that. Otherwise, you're like, I don't know. And it's a real big pain in the butt. So anyway, that should help you when you're troubleshooting stuff. Thank you, Alec. All right. So does that make sense how that works? I know I went over it real fast. We have these policies on the endpoints. So the authorize attribute, policy, reader. And then the authorize policy writer. And so what happens is in our startup, we've set up these policies for reader and writer. And so for the reader policy, we're saying that the reader policy requires the role authentication.read, or application.read, sorry. And then the writer policy requires application.write. And so you have to have those roles in the token in order for you to be authorized to use those endpoints. Make sense? That's RBAC. Yeah.
When you were creating the tools originally, I see like any config options on the Azure side for like read, write, update. So is it up to like the implementation of the code to always add that role to all the gets?
Yes.
Right to the post.
Yep. Yeah, and you can add it at the controller level, just the same as you can at the endpoint level. So it works that way too. But yeah, at this point, it's up to your applications. This is where Entra ID starts to really fall down. I don't know how they can fix it, so I'm not blaming Microsoft. But they don't know what your application should do, and your application is really the only thing that knows when I retrieve this record from the database and give it back to the user, are they authorized to do that? Only your application knows. And Entra ID can tell you, yeah, this is what the user is, this is who they are, this is what I know about them, but you need to make a decision based on that, right?
Like at one point here, I think there are third-party providers in the market who can extract this large amount of policies and maintain it as a service. The application does not have yet, so that you're free of don't have.
Yeah. At some point, your application has to indicate, though, that I am dependent on this policy for this thing, right? There's just no way around it. And I'm going to show you, it's called OpenFGA, and then there's another one called Open Policy. I can't remember, but anyway, really good, like free solutions that. Oh yeah, OPA. What's the last word? Open Policy. Agent. Yeah, open policy. Open policy. So that's another good one too. I'm not going to talk about that, but certainly something to look at.
These rules names are clearly arbitrary, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Could have been anything that I wanted to put. Yep. Yeah. And so are the policies themselves. Like these policies can be set up. You can do require role, or we can do things like. They have this combine capability where you can combine different policies together. So and they require assertions. So you can, and this one will take a Lambda expression, then you can like do stuff in your Lambda expression, then it will determine based on the information that it receives, is the user authorized to do the thing that they're doing. Require authenticate. The user require a claim, so that you can say arbitrarily, I want this claim to be on the token. Right, and then require role, require a specific username. That's probably not a great strategy, but and then there's require scope, so a certain scope from your app registration, permissions, and then there's ways to combine all this stuff together. And then there's lots of third-party stuff that you can add into this as well. Any other questions about RBAC? Easy enough, right? Did anybody raise their hand while I was looking down? Sorry. Shout out. Stop me. Okay. All right, so how do we do ABAC? ABAC is really very similar to RBAC, and really only, in terms of this application, it only differs in the way you set up Entra ID. Because it still adds role claims to your token. It still passes those claims into your application. You still set up policies to to use those. It's just that the users are being dynamically allocated to those roles on the fly. And so I'll show you how we do that. So we're going to drop back over to our enterprise application. Actually, no, we're not. We're going to go back up to our groups. And so you'll see in here that I have Denver users, I have Lincoln users, I have Omaha users. And so let's take a look at the Omaha users group. The fun thing about this is what's called a dynamic group inside of Entra ID. Dynamic groups automatically populate their membership based on user attributes. And so I didn't add any users to this group. They will be automatically added when their attributes are updated to match their criteria. But you can see that if I check out the members in here, that Demo Omaha is in the group. And the reason that happens that way is because when I set this dynamic group up, I added an expression that said user.city-equals Omaha. And so now whenever I add a user into my directory that has a city that is Omaha, it will automatically get added to this group without any intervention from anybody anywhere, right? Pretty cool stuff. We definitely use this to Kiwit for a number of things. Membership or to grant kind of broad access to a lot of applications to a specific set of users who we can identify.
So like a lot of companies should use this for onboarding.
For onboarding?
Yeah.
Right.
When you dev, you just get thrown in all the records, you don't have to call security 15 times.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So you can become a developer, and then that something about your profile says developer. I'm a developer, which automatically puts you into all the various groups that give you access to the things across the organization. So yeah. Makes sense? I mean, that's really ABAC. I'm not going to get it. It's basically the same in the code. There's other ways you can do this. We also have a tool called Savient that we use to do identity management. It can be used to do this sort of thing as well. And you can build these policies so that they consume resources from other systems. So we can connect our web API to Savient directly and have it tell us whether or not a user is authorized. And it would do that based on the user's attributes and whatever it wanted to do. That's also a possibility.
So then is your FTA requirement looking for a group membership claim? A group claim?
No, the fine-grained authorization, or ReBAC.
Is that what your FTA is?
Yeah, the FGA would, in my mind, and I'm just standing up here in front of the user group, the Omaha user group. I'm not an authority figure, right? But in my mind, ReBAC is FGA. They go hand in hand.
Well, so you got this person now, Omaha Demo is in this group. How do you use that in your authorization?
The same way that you would use any other group. Like I can assign this group to my enterprise application. Back here in the roles, users and groups, I can just add that group into this guy. So I select the group. Omaha, Demo Omaha, oops. And then I assign that user to let's say we want that user to be a reader in my app, or not that group to be a reader, right? And so then whenever a user gets assigned to that dynamic group, it's also assigned to this role in my application. And whenever I log in, I'm going to get that role added to my token, and then I can validate it in my application.
Group roles happens only work with regular Entra too. They don't work with BC or BD Entra.
Okay.
Something like a hard way if you do that.
All right. I haven't. Unfortunately, I haven't had a reason to really get into B2C yet. The business to consumer side of it. It works B2B though, right? Or probably not. No, because you would have to share your groups across tenants if you did that. Yeah. Makes sense.
Cross-tenant shenanigans, but if you do the B2C and B2B stuff, it gets a little, it looks like it should, it's the same exact UI, but sublines doesn't work.
Okay. So caveat to everything that I'm saying is that you're a single tenant. Okay, any questions on RBAC, or ABAC, sorry. I'm gonna run out of time. The cool stuff is yet to come. Okay, let's skip ahead, because I really want to show you this OpenFGA. Let's just take a look at their documentation real quick. So OpenFGA is a tool that we can use to model our authorization. We can assign or give it the data so it can be smart enough to make decisions about our authorization, and we can test those authorizations in assertions. And you're going to see all that here in a second. So the way that I've done this, and I'm going to just pull up some Docker commands here, but this is the way they encourage you to use it with Docker. If you're not familiar with Docker, you should be, because it's going to be everywhere. And it almost is everywhere now. So let's see if, yep, so I already have an OpenFGA network. I'm going to create a Postgres database, because they require a Postgres database in the back end for you to use. So Docker run, and then Postgres user group. You probably can't see that, I suppose. Network OpenFGA user group. So I'm going to stick these all inside the same Docker network. The user, the password, and then the container that I want to run. Oh, it's already running. Let's see. Do I already have this up and going? What? Oops. Docker ps-a. Okay, I guess I already got them. Oh, there they are. Okay, they were just hidden. Okay, so I'm just going to start them here in Docker, because that's easier. If you want the commands, we can look at that. So this is running on localhost port 3000/playground. All right, and so this is there's a number of things going on here. Over on the left-hand side, we've got the authorization model. This is the definition of the way you want your authorization in your application to work. And so let's review this real quick. Let me see if I can. So we have types. So we got a type user, a type group, a type folder, and a type document. So you can start to see how this lays out. I've got users. Don't worry about groups, because we're not going to get into it. Folders and docs, right? And so the natural way that those things flow is that users are assigned to folders and users are assigned to documents. Folders are assigned to folders, because you can have subfolders, right? And then docs are assigned to folders. Docs can't be assigned to docs, because that doesn't make any sense, right? And so that the way you define that structure is in this OpenFGA specific DSL, and it might be hard to read. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Nope. Nope. Well, now I've done it. Nope, dang. Okay, well, I'll just have to read it to you. Okay, and so then inside of each type, we have relationships. And those relationships allow us to take different types and relate them to one another. Seems natural. And so users are kind of the basic building block. They don't have any relationships. Nothing can be assigned, nothing can be related directly to a user. A user is a user. But a folder has several different relationships. We define a few different roles. So can create file is an owner. An owner, so you can assign relationships to other relationships. That's kind of a key concept. Owners can be users, so assigning users directly to the owner relationship on a folder. That's possible. We can do that. So an owner is either a user or it's an owner from parent. And parent is another relationship that points to a folder, right? And so this is where the hierarchy comes in. You see that if I'm an owner on a parent, I'm also an owner on this document. And this flows the whole way down. Like if you had a directory structure that was 100 folders deep, this would flow all the way to the bottom. If you're assigned as an owner at the top, you have ownership all the way to the bottom. Really cool, just with those few lines. We also have viewers. Viewers can be directly assigned as a user. If we wanted to, we could set it up so that all users are viewers without having to be directly assigned, or group members. And I'm not going to get into group members. Or a viewer could be an owner, because an owner should have all the rights that a viewer has, right? Just by nature. If you own it, you can see it. Or you're a viewer from the parent. So same thing as we were talking about. If you're a viewer at the very top level, you're a viewer all the way down. Or you're an owner from the parent, right? So you're a viewer. I guess this is sort of redundant because we've already said owner from parent up here. So this is unnecessary. I'm going to take that off. I'm learning this stuff too. Okay, and then documents are similar. Can change owner, can read, can share, can write, and so on and so forth. And so we then have, well, let me stop. Any questions on that? I'm sure there's tons of questions that, like, how does this work? I don't know.
Is that Rego?
Is it what?
What's the language? This language is Rego?
I don't know what language it is. I think it's just it says here it's a DSL domain-specific language, so I assume it's something that OpenFGA invented. I mean, it looks like it might be something like YAML. I'm not sure, but what did you think it was?
Rego. Rego is used in similar product services that are offered by other vendors.
Okay.
And they're bringing OPA, basically.
Okay.
I'm guessing this also is built on top of that.
All right. Yeah, underneath they have this JSON, that it just copies it to the clipboard. But you can convert this to JSON and back and forth, so you can do it that way too. And there's an API that sits behind all this. Everything that I'm showing you now can and should be done through the API. Right. This is just a visual that kind of helps us understand it. This is one of the cool things about this product, I think. And again, totally free. Like it's sponsored by Auth0, but yeah. And so then the other components that we have here are tuples, and the tuples are where we start adding data to the system. And so it has they call it a user. I don't know why they call it a user, because it's not always a user. And then they have a relationship, and then they have an object. And so what we do is we assign the user, which is a type, to a object with a specific relationship. And so you can see here that the folder, let's do the folder root is a parent for the folder root Omaha. Right, so you have to tell it all this stuff. It just doesn't know by nature that this is set up. So you have to go through and add all this stuff. But I wrote really simple code that built this for me and added it to the system. And so then, same thing. We get folder. Well, and here's another one. So we get user demo Omaha is an owner for the folder root Omaha, right? So the Omaha user is an owner for the Omaha folder. And then my user, Matt at omaha.dev, is an owner for the root folder at the very top, right? So I have access to everything. Omaha has access to Omaha. Lincoln has access to Lincoln. Denver has access to Denver. And so these kind of go on for a bit here. And then at the bottom, we say that user star, all users, have viewer access to the root folder. And so anybody that logs into the system will have viewer access because of that addition there. Make sense? The documentation on their website is actually pretty good. It goes in, this is way more sophisticated than I'm showing, but I would encourage you to go out and check it out. And then the very last thing that we want to look at in here are the assertions. And so this is how we're able to test our authorization in the system. We have user Matt at omaha.dev, and we're asking this question now. Is Matt at omaha.dev an owner for the doc file Lincoln 1, which is under the Lincoln folder, right? And so then I can click the exclamation point there, and then it walks me through how that happened. And so it's saying, yes, Matt is authorized to see that file. And so Matt is a direct owner, and it'll walk you through what it did to figure that out. And so Matt is a direct owner on the root. He's also which makes him an owner on the Lincoln folder, which makes him an owner on the doc file Lincoln, right? And you can do the full tree, and it will show you all the possible paths that it could have taken to get there. And again, you're just going to want to play around with this on your own, because it's a bit much to figure out in an hour and a half long presentation. Make sense? Or at least enough? Do you get the general concept? There's more to learn, but yeah.
Did you mention how you can run it on your own?
What's that?
If you wanted to play with it on your own, what does it take to run it?
Yeah, you can set up Docker to do it yourself, or they have on their site, I always struggle to find it. There's a link on here that they'll set up a system, and they have some really great, here we go, OpenFGA Playground, yeah. So then they'll set one up for you, and then it's just running in their servers to do this. And then they have several models out here that model some things that we should all be familiar with. So GitHub, Google Drive, expenses, IoT, Slack, entitlements, custom roles. So let's take a look at GitHub real quick. This is the authorization model for GitHub, in their opinion, and I'm sure it's a little bit different. But so you have organizations, you have repos, and you have teams, and you have users, right? And then repos are adminned by either a user or a team member or a repo admin from owner. So there's an owner relationship in here too, right there, which is the owner is an organization, and an organization has an owner as well, and which is assigned to a user. So if you own an organization, you also own all the repos, is what that's saying. Okay, and then to wrap this up, because I know we're just about out of time here, the way that we take advantage of this in our API is to use a very nice authorization policy that somebody out there put together. I made a comment on this guy's GitHub repo. I opened an issue, and within like an hour and a half, he's like, "Yeah, I'll fix that," and it was done. So pretty cool. I think he's He's just getting started with it, so he's probably pretty excited about it. But yeah, I was super impressed that he got back to me that fast. It's just FGA.net is what I use to do this. And what it does is it creates a authorization policy in ASP.NET. So using the core guts of ASP.NET policies to connect to OpenFGA to set up your connection into your FGA server and then issue commands. And so the way that works, let me walk you through it here. So we have to add an OpenFGA client service. And we have the store ID and the API URL. And these are just constants that I've set up in here. So the store ID ends up looking something like this. All right, then we have the authorization model ID. And then the API URI. And so you can connect to this via either RESTful APIs or gRPC. It supports both. I believe the OpenFGA is using gRPC to connect, which would be better, right? Anyway, so we add the OpenFGA client, we add the OpenFGA middleware, which just sets up some dependency injection for us. It also allows us to define how our user is named, and so we can override what that looks like. So it's able to map the user to what we have defined in our authorization model as a user. And then we add a FGA policy right here. Add policy, and then the policy key is just the same as writer, except it's constant. Require authenticated user, require role, and then I also have, so these two are sort of redundant. Not necessary, but this add FGA requirement is the key, right? And so once you do that, inside of your controllers, you're able to, and this is what was kind of messing me up earlier, you add an authorization policy to the top of your controller, which will turn it on for everything. So any endpoint in here will now be dependent on OpenFGA to do your authorization. And then on each one of your routes, and so you wouldn't want to have an authorization policy, unless you wanted to be probably confused. There's this FGA route object, and this is really cool. Most of the time, these are hard-coded, right? So the authorized policy is reader, right? So then it's just reader. And attributes typically only allow you to put constants in, and can't be a dynamic variable, which is true for the FGA route object, but there's three different components here, and we saw these inside of FGA, right? So we have, in our assertions, we have users, relationships, and objects, right? And so in here we have the user gets passed in by default. The relationship is type viewer. The type, which in this case would be the user. No, that's difficult, but the type is folder. So does this action have access to a folder with the name that comes out of the variable that's passed into the endpoint? And that's the thing that sets this apart, right? Is that I'm able to take a route parameter and pass it into my authorization endpoint and control that in my attribute. Right? I think this is really, really cool. And then when I do that, it calls back, this attribute will call back into FGA and either authorize or not authorize the user based on who they are and what they have access to. Make sense? So I don't know. It'll take me a few minutes to get to make the demo work. I know we're at time, so I don't want to. You can just trust me that it works, or we can go through it. But I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. Are there any questions about this? Yeah, Brian.
When you're creating a folder, what would your interaction be with
Yeah, that's a good point. And this is honestly something that I'm struggling with, trying to figure out how we would do this at Kiewit. I have this sync controller, which basically is just an endpoint that synchronizes my data model with FGA. And it just ends up looking like this. So you have this write client request, which is this is the FGA type. In there we pass in the user, the relationship, and the object. And then we, so this is a folder, this is a parent, the folder path. And so this is setting up all that parent-child relationship between the folders based on the data model that I have. And so it's just, this is a recursive function that loops around and builds the hierarchy for you. And so then you have these client write requests, which then, at the very end of it, I call this FGA client write, and then body, and then it's pretty straightforward.
So you're creating a folder as normal, and then you have this other job that syncs your folders.
Yeah, at some point you're going to have to synchronize your data in your database, or data, however you're storing your data. That needs to be synchronized with OpenFGA.
So does it kind of support any offline? If your application goes offline, does it kind of support doing the authorization if you are offline?
Well, offline is always tricky. That's a really good question. I don't know how we would do offline authorization. It would have to be done when you resynchronize, right? I mean, at that point, you'd have to be authorized to do the things that you're supposed to do. That makes sense? I can't think of a way that would work otherwise. And you might, in offline mode, want to know whether or not the user is authorized to do a certain thing. I don't know how that would work, because we're relying on OpenFGA to do that for us, and it's a fairly, it's a server, and
like a Merkle tree that represents the entire graph.
Yeah.
And you have to compare the user's hash to see if they have permissions on those leads.
Yeah, right. You'd somehow need to have all of that information on your client. Yeah.
You kind of run into a similar version of that on the stop.
Mm-hmm.
Do I turn the button on for creating it?
Right. Yep. Yeah, what else? What other questions you guys have overall? Someday I will keep a presentation under an hour and a half. Okay. Great. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I'm going to keep working on this. This is what I'm doing at Kiewit right now. I might follow up at some point in the future, and we'll continue talking about it. But yeah.
OpenAI seems like it's expensive.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, that's the use for everything.
Cool. All right. Yeah, I've heard a lot of big names using OpenFGA. The Open Policy agent is also, that one looks more sophisticated. Looks like it might be more capable. I'm not sure, I haven't looked at it, but there's definitely more parts, more things in it. So, yeah.
There is a lot of competition in this industry right now. A lot of providers like Summons, I can say Azure, Permit.io, OpenFGA, they all are like competing with each other.
Yep.
For this authorization vacant space. So, and then in terms of capabilities, like they are varied. So
Yep.
FGA is, they're trying to bridge the gap.
Yeah, it's a big problem. I don't know what people are doing outside when they're using ABAC and ReBAC. Or RBAC. It doesn't work for so many sophisticated problems that are out there. So.
It fits really well with the microservices architecture and sidecar pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, which is actually the way that we're anticipating doing it at Kiewit. So that way our users, our developers don't even have to be aware that it's happening in the back end, right? Cool. All right, well, we're at time. We got some giveaways to do, but thank you guys for your time.